first note I noticed was beside my foot while I was waiting, alone inside the ruins. It said, "Your friends have gone back without you." This happened during a weekend away in North Yorkshire when I was 19. There was 5 of us, me, Lewis, Ryan, Ben and Callum. We had finished college a few weeks earlier and decided to book a cheap Airbnb together before everyone disappeared off to university or started working. The place was an old stone cottage in a tiny village. It wasn't particularly remote, but it felt that way after dark. There were no street lights outside the cottage, barely any phone signal, and the nearest shop was closed before we even arrived. Byland Abbey was only a short walk away. We passed it while driving that afternoon. Even in daylight there was something unsettling about it. The first night we went to a pub a few miles away. The plan was to have a meal, a couple of drinks before getting a taxi back. We stayed until closing. We had drunk more than the others. Not enough to forget what happened, but enough to feel far more confident than I should have done. Lewis kept trying different taxi numbers while the rest of us stood behind the pub watching the rain. Eventually a man who had been drinking inside offered us a lift. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. He had been sitting alone in the bar for most of the evening and had spoken to Callum and Ben a few times. Nothing unusual. "We'll do 2 trips, Lewis said. I said I would wait, because I wanted some air. They promised they would drop everyone at the cottage and come straight back for me. For the first few minutes I stood beneath the awning, listening to the rain hitting the road. Then I became impatient. I knew the cottage was only a few miles away, and I was convinced I remembered the route. So I messaged Lewis, telling him not to bother coming back. Then I started walking. That was my first mistake. After about 20 minutes, I realized I had taken the wrong road. The lights of the village had disappeared behind me. There was nothing ahead except hedges, fields, and the occasional farmhouse set far back from the lane. My phone had 12% battery and no signal. I kept walking because turning around felt pointless. I was certain the road would eventually connect with the lane near the cottage. Then, through the rain, I saw the abbey. I felt relieved. The cottage was somewhere beyond it. There was a narrow lane running beside the abbey grounds, and I followed it using my torch on my phone to see where I was going. That was when I heard someone whistle. It came from somewhere behind me. Just 2 short notes. I stopped and looked back. There was no one on the lane. "Lewis?" No answer. I laughed to myself. They must have returned to the pub, discovered I had gone, and followed the route they thought I would take. I shouted again. "Very funny, I know you're there." Another whistle came from inside the abbey. I should have continued towards the cottage. Instead, I walked closer. Inside the ruins, the sound of the rain changed. Water tapped against the old stone and gathered in the remains of the roofless rooms. Every footstep echoed between the walls, making it difficult to tell whether the noises were mine or someone else's. My torch passed over empty arches and broken columns. Then I saw a figure move through an opening ahead of me. Only for a second. Someone was wearing a dark coat. Ryan? The figure disappeared behind a wall. I hurried after it. When I reached the opening, there was nobody there. The ground on the other side was open and flat. There was nowhere anyone could have hidden without me seeing them. Then my phone vibrated. For a moment I thought I had received a message, but there was still no signal. It was a battery warning. 5% remaining. I turned to leave. That was when I noticed the paper beside my foot. It was a small square torn from a notebook. There were 6 words written on it in black ink. Your friends have gone back without you. I picked it up. The paper was dry, not slightly damp, completely dry. I looked around expecting someone to laugh. Come on, joke's over. From somewhere deeper in the abbey, a voice whispered, Not yet. It sounded like Lewis. I followed it. I know that sounds ridiculous, but at the time I still believed my friends were playing a trick. The alcohol made everything feel less dangerous than it was. I passed beneath another archway and entered what must have been a large room. At the far side, my torch caught another piece of white paper. It had been placed carefully on top of a broken section of wall. This one said, Lewis is waiting in the church. I remember smiling because that seemed to confirm it. Lewis was behind the whole thing. He had probably found an old notebook at the cottage and convinced the others to help him frighten me. I pushed the note into my pocket. Right, Lewis, I'm coming. As soon as I moved towards the remains of the church, I heard footsteps ahead. Slow footsteps. They stopped whenever I stopped, then began again when I moved. I reached the centre of the ruined church and shone my light between the columns. Nobody was there. Lewis? A voice answered from the darkness. Over here. It was definitely his voice. It came from behind a section on the wall to my left. I stepped towards it. Then I heard Lewis again. Over here. This time the voice came from my right. The exact same words, the exact same tone. I stood still. My phone light began to flicker. I backed away. Something scraped across the stone behind me. I turned around. A third note was lying on the ground. I hadn't seen anyone place it there. And the handwriting was larger this time, more rushed. You should not have followed me. I ran. I didn't look for the path. I just moved towards the nearest opening, tripping over loose stones and sliding on the wet grass. Behind me, someone started whistling. The same 2 notes I had heard from the road, except now they were getting closer. I reached the edge of the ruins and climbed over the low wall. As I landed on the lane, my phone switched off. Everything went black. I could hear my own breathing and the rain striking the leaves. Then footsteps crossed the grass behind me. They weren't running, they were walking. Whoever it was didn't need to hurry. I felt along the wall until I found the lane. then ran in what I hoped was the direction of the cottage. The whistling continued behind me. Each time it stopped, I heard the footsteps. Each time the footsteps stopped, the whistling began again. Eventually I saw lights between the trees, the cottage. I ran to the front door and hammered at it. Lewis opened it almost immediately. He was wearing jogging bottoms and a t-shirt. Behind him, the others were sitting in the living room and drinking. They all stared at me. I was soaked, covered in mud and struggling to breathe. Lewis pulled me inside. "Where the hell have you been?" I pushed past him and looked into the room. All four of them were there. The coats were hanging beside the fireplace drying. "How long have you been back?" "Nearly an hour," Ryan said. I accused them for following me. They thought I was joking. The room went quiet. Lewis picked up the second note. "I didn't write this." I told them about the figure and the voice. At first, Ben suggested that someone local had seen me walking and decided to frighten me. The explanation almost made sense. Then Callum asked how the person knew Lewis' name. I had shouted it near the ruins, but not until after the first whistle. The second note must already have been waiting inside. None of us slept properly that night. We locked the doors, checked every window, and left the landing light on. Nobody admitted to speaking to anyone unusual at the pub. Ben and Callum remembered the man who had given them the lift, but said the conversation had been completely ordinary. By morning, the whole thing felt less threatening. It was easier to blame the alcohol, the darkness, and some stranger with a strange sense of humour. We agreed to pack up and leave after breakfast. At around 8, Lewis opened the front door to take our bags to the car. Something was lying on the doormat. Another square of paper. The same size as the others. The same black handwriting. Lewis bent down and picked it up. The rest of us gathered behind him. He read it once, then again. His face changed. "What does it say?" Ryan said. Lewis slowly turned the paper around. It read, "Thank you for telling me where you were staying." Nobody spoke. That one word made it worse. Me.